started. Okay, let's start. Okay, so last time, when we learned about the different organelles of the cell, we also learned about the levels of organization. So when we learned all about the cell, we are here on the third most smallest in terms of the level of organization. Of course, the smallest will be your atoms, followed by your molecules. And then these molecules will form your organelles, and then it will form your cell. And we said that cell is the basic unit of life, which means that your cell is actually the smallest living organism that is possible. We also learned that when we have different kind, or we have multiple cells that have the same functions, we call them as the tissues. And then when these tissues, they form or they group together and then they function similarly, they will form your organs. And then different organs will form organ systems or the body systems. And then the combination of different body systems will now form your organism or a person. So now let's continue this level of organization. So if one person lives in the same area with other people, they have to be same species. For example, the species is a cat, and there are many cats in Olongapo City or in Subic. Okay, so they are the same species, but they are living in the same area or in the same habitat. We call that as your population. So the population of people, for example, in the Philippines, or the population of Filipinos, it means what we are talking about is that same species of humans, and we are talking about the location of the Philippines. So that is why we call it as Philippine population. Okay, so if in Subic there are, let's say for example, 1,000 cats, it means that there is the population of cats in Subic is 1,000. So you have to remember that in population, what we are talking about is same species living in the same area. Okay, so, but you have to remember that in an area or in a community, there are different kinds of species. For example, in Subic, there are, of course, humans, there are some cats, there are some dogs, there are chickens,
Birds,
pigs, there are birds, there are insects, there are even different kinds of trees, different kinds of vegetables. So there are different kinds of species that is living in the same area. So because there are different species, that is why we call them as a community. So in a community, we are still talking about one area, but this time we are focusing on different species of organisms. In population, we are focusing only in one species, in one area. But in community, several species living in the same area. So in the picture here, there's a giraffe, there's an elephant, and then there are trees that provide the food. So this is what we call as community. Now, you have to remember, in population and in community, we are only talking about living organisms or organisms that have life. But what about those things or organisms that does not have life? So in ecosystem, what we are focusing on is the interaction of living organisms and non-living organisms. So this is our focus for today's lesson. For our lesson this week, we will focus on the ecosystem. And before we start with the actual lesson, I will be giving you the essential questions, or the questions that you should be able to answer at the end of our lesson. So the first essential question is, what is an ecosystem? So you can define what an ecosystem is and what makes it different from community or population. The second essential question is, of course, we have to identify and to differentiate what is a biotic component and what is an abiotic component. So the 9 o'clock activity is actually related to the second essential question. And then because an ecosystem focuses on the interaction between living things and non-living things, it means that there are different relationships that can be observed in the ecosystem. So number 3 essential question is, what are the different relationships that can be observed in an ecosystem? So later on, we will go back to these essential questions. Hopefully, we will be able to answer all of these essential questions. Okay? So now let's start. So sabi nga natin, our focus for today is all about ecosystem, and the study of ecosystem or the interactions in the environment is what we call as ecology. Okay? So what is ecology? So ecology is the branch of science. So it's a specific kind of science that focuses on different global processes, specifically the studies of different habitats. So ecologists, what they focus on is different ecosystems or different habitats. So for example, in the picture here, we have the habitat of what do you call this? Prairie. So when we say prairie, wait, let me write this down. Siguro sa chat box na lang, no? So prairies, sorry, I chat it privately kay Kuya Yuri. So when we say prairie, it means this is an ecosystem or a habitat with grasses mostly. There, you will not find a lot of trees in a prairie. You will find a lot of grasses. So in this kind of ecosystem, big animals are not common. So usually they have smaller mammals or smaller animals found here. Another ecosystem or habitat that is here in the picture, of course, is your marine ecosystem or underwater. So this time it is salt water, so under the sea or under the ocean, okay? And there are other kinds of ecosystems. We will learn all about them siguro by next week as we continue our lesson. And then, of course, ecology focuses on the interactions between the different organisms that is found in a habitat and how they interact with the non-living organisms in that ecosystem. Okay, so sabi niya dito, we are focusing on the interactions. So when we say interactions, it means that we are depending on each other in order for us to survive. So hindi pwedeng in an ecosystem, there are only living organisms. Non-living organisms are very essential or very important in an ecosystem. We cannot survive without the wind. We cannot survive without the soil. We cannot survive without the water. So they are also important. And how we use them, how we interact with them, how we depend on them is the focus of ecology. Okay? So the surroundings of an organism, sabi niya dito, affects its growth and development. So sabi nga natin, even though they don't have life, they are still very important because we need them in order to survive. So these non-living organisms, they are essential, or the environment or the surroundings around us, they are essential for our life. Okay, so in an ecosystem, we have two components, and we call them as the abiotic and the biotic factors, or the abiotic and the biotic components. Okay, so from the definition here, wait lang. Okay, so abiotic factors, it says here, these are your non-living components. So in the instruction earlier during the 9 o'clock activity, I told you to categorize your list of 20 things, you categorize them as abiotic if it does not have life. Because abiotic factors focus on the non-living components of an ecosystem. So example of abiotic factors here includes the weather. Okay, so depending on the weather, if it is sunny, if it is rainy, there are different kinds of animals that thrive on sunny weather. There are different animals that thrive on rainy seasons, okay, including seasonal changes. Diba? When you go to other countries, there are seasonal fruits, seasonal plants. For example, in Japan, they have yung sakura or yung, what is another name for sakura? Cherry blossoms. Diba? Cherry blossoms is a seasonal plant or a seasonal flower. You can only experience cherry blossoms during springtime. So during springtime, if you want to see cherry blossoms, you have to visit Korea or Japan or other countries with cherry blossoms during springtime only because they are very seasonal. Even in the Philippines, we have seasonal fruits. For example, mangoes, right? Mangoes are only abundant during the summer season because mangoes, they thrive in summer seasons. Yes po, Kuya Reynald, you raise your hand.
Sure, like rambutan.
Yes. Even strawberries in, what do you call this, in Baguio, diba? They have the strawberry farm there, pero usually the sweetest, the biggest, and the cheapest strawberry is usually during winter time, around January or February in the Philippines, in the Philippines. Pero when you go to other countries like Japan, strawberry is actually a summer fruit. So usually very abundant siya during May, June, and July. Okay? Because the seasons affect how the living organisms in an ecosystem will grow and develop. Okay? We are also affected by the tides. For example, if it's low tide or high tide, the air quality, okay? If there is a lot of pollution in an area, sometimes some organisms cannot thrive in that location or in that area. For example, yung fireflies. Fireflies are organisms that thrive in areas that have really clean air. So usually in provinces, in Palawan, there is an area there that is not polluted and you can experience a lot of fireflies. Pero here in Olongapo and in Subic, very rare that you can experience fireflies. So maybe it's an indication that the quality of our air is becoming very poor, meaning our air is becoming more and more polluted. So that is an indication probably. Okay, and of course, other factors that is categorized under abiotic factor is yung soil. Of course, the quality of your soil, because there are some soil that does not have a lot of nutrients. For example, sand on the beach, you do not observe a lot of plants growing. Number one, because sand is not appropriate for growing plants. At the same time, the water there is salty, so plants cannot grow very abundantly on the beach. Pero when you go to the mountain area or when you go to other areas that have good quality soil, you can easily plant, diba? Different plants and they will grow and develop really well. Other than that, air also is included, water, soil, even the idea of urbanization or how many people live in that area is considered as an abiotic factor. And then of course, we have these biotic factors. So these biotic factors, these are the organisms found in your ecosystem that is living or it has life. So basically all the plants and animals, the insects, all of those are considered as biotic factors. So sabi niya dito, an ecosystem is a combination of all communities that live in an area together with the abiotic factors in the environment. So in short, our ecosystem is a combination of the living and non-living things, and it focuses on how we depend and how we work with each other in order for us to survive. So if we do not take care of the air in our environment, in the end, it will be the living organisms or the biotic factors who will suffer. So as the biotic factors, we have to take care of the abiotic factors because they are there in an ecosystem for us to survive. Yes, Kuya Reynald.
Sure, if we don't care our planet, it's just because it may have some consequences in our life and other animals as well.
Yes, basically that is what ecosystem is all about. Whatever we do as the living components of the ecosystem, it will always have consequences. So if we take care of the abiotic factors properly, it means that we will benefit from it. For example, if we take care of the air, if we take care of the water, if we take care of the soil, in the end, we will benefit from it. But as living organisms, if we do not take care of the abiotic factors in our ecosystem, it means that it will also be a consequence for us. We will suffer in the end because we did not take care of these abiotic factors. So if you will remember from the core values of the school, the idea of stewardship, we are the living organisms, especially humans. We have the rationale or the mind, the reasoning to take care of these abiotic factors because it is our responsibility. And if we do not do it, then we will suffer the consequences in the end. So we can experience some of the consequences now, such as global warming, climate change, or some of us experience high prices in food because we are not taking care of the ocean, so we do not have a lot of fish. And if there is not a lot of fish, it means that the prices of fish and other seafood in the market will start to increase. So it all depends on us, the biotic factors, specifically as humans, okay? So all of the living organisms or all of the biotic factors on our planet is what we call as the biosphere. Okay? So the biosphere is the part of the earth that supports life. So all biotic components on our planet is considered to be part of the biosphere. Okay? So biosphere includes living organisms on air in our atmosphere. It includes the biotic components on land, and it also includes the biotic components underwater. Okay? And you have to remember that the abiotic and biotic factors are intimately intertwined. They cannot function without another. Okay? So we cannot live without water. We cannot live without the air. And we cannot live without the sun. So the same, for example, in your plants, they cannot do photosynthesis without the sun and without water. So for an ecosystem to exist, it has to have both the abiotic and the biotic factors. Okay? Before I continue with the next slide, I would like to remind everyone to please open their camera, except for Dunstan and for Ayana. Leonard. Okay. Now let's go and continue. So for example, on the pictures here on our slide, so this is a different kind of ecosystem. So if you will notice, there are different kinds of abiotic factors that is influencing this ecosystem. So the amount of rainfall is very low in this kind of ecosystem compared on the second picture here. In this second picture, you can expect that this area is receiving more rainfall. That is why on the second picture, there are more plants growing compared on the other picture. The amount of rainfall is very low, so you can experience fewer plants to grow in this kind of ecosystem. And because there are fewer plants, it means that the amount of food that you can find in this kind of ecosystem will also be low. So because of that, you can conclude that the animals that live in this picture or in this ecosystem, they are smaller because they can survive on fewer food resources. Okay. At the same time, you can expect that big animals will not survive or will not thrive in this kind of ecosystem. But on the second picture, because there are a lot of grasses that is growing in this ecosystem, then you can expect that there are more animals that can live or that can thrive in this kind of ecosystem. So it all depends on the abiotic factors. Okay? In your desert, do you know that by definition, a desert is an ecosystem that has very little rainfall. And based on that definition, the Antarctic and the Arctic poles are called as deserts. Medyo ano lang, trivia lang. The number one or the biggest desert in our planet is actually found in the Arctic poles or in the Arctic areas, followed by the Antarctic, followed by the Sahara Desert. Kasi by definition, in ecology, by definition, deserts are areas with very little rainfall. So, because in the Arctic and Antarctic area, di ba ito yung mga north and south poles ninyo? So, ibig sabihin, they are frozen ice. Wala silang nare-receive na rainfall, so they are considered as deserts. And because they don't have a lot of rainfall, ibig sabihin, walang plants or very little to no plants can grow in the Arctic and in the Antarctic. So because of that, very few then yung animals that are able to live and thrive in these ecosystems. Yes, Kuya Reynald.
Sure, the lesser the trees, the more scarce the food. The more the grass, trees, etc., the more the food it will get, because due to the rainfall.
Yes, and it also depends on the geographic location. Okay, you will observe, for example, in tropical areas, the animals are very colorful. Pero in other areas of the planet, there are birds, there are flowers, but they are not as colorful as those found in the tropical areas. So like I said, because they have different abiotic factors that are influencing them. So in the tropical area, for example, our tigers, sila yung mga Bengal tigers, the yellow tigers. Pero in other areas, yung mga nasa tundras, they are not Bengal tigers. Usually sila yung mga white or grayish kind of tigers. Even the bears. In America, they have yung brown bear. Pero when the grizzly bear, yes. Pero when you go to the polar caps sa Antarctic at saka sa Arctic, they have the white bears, yung snow bears. Diba?
Polar bears.
What?
Polar bears.
Yes, the polar bears or the snow bears. The reason why is because iba yung kanilang environment, iba yung kanilang abiotic factors found in that area. Even the panda bear is different, di ba? Kasi iba din yung kanyang environment. So the idea of the ecosystem is that it is very influenced by the abiotic factors. Kung ano yung animals and plants na tumutubo doon is actually dictated by the abiotic factors. So kung maraming rainfall, ibang animals and ibang plants yung mag-thrive in this area. Pag konti yung rainfall, iba yung plants and animals that will thrive in this area. Okay, so hindi
yung humans, sir, madali sila mag-adapt.
We are able to adapt. We are able to evolve and we are able to adapt to different kinds of ecosystems. For example, for people who live on the mountain, medyo may mga adaptations na yung katawan nila that allows them to live there. For example, in Baguio, because of the altitude, mas mataas yung area nila. So the amount of oxygen present in the atmosphere is lower. So for people who live in Baguio for a long time, naka-adapt na yung katawan nila na mas konti yung oxygen content ng atmosphere. So their body has to get more oxygen from the air. Kaya yung mga athletes, for example, Manny Pacquiao, before a fight, he usually trains in Baguio. Bakit ba siya pumupunta sa Baguio? Kasi sa
stamina, sir.
Kasi it builds
stamina.
Why? Because the amount of oxygen in Baguio is lower. So ibig sabihin, mas madali kang mapagod pagka tumatakbo or nag-exercise ka in Baguio. So kung makakatagal siya ng 1 hour in Baguio na nag-exercise before siya mapagod, when he goes down, for example, sa Manila, na mas mababa yung altitude, more than 1 hour yung kaya niyang i-exercise before siya mapapagod. So it builds stamina and endurance kasi iba yung location ng Baguio sa Manila. Okay? So, yun yung abiotic factors.
Paano kapag nakapag 5 hours ka pala dun na training?
Sabihin, mas kaya mong mag-extend more than 5 hours pag nandito ka sa mas mababang lugar. Kasi mas maraming oxygen dito eh. So, mas matagal ka before mapagod. Okay, so that is one of the reasons why Manny Pacquiao usually trains in Baguio before a fight. Hindi dahil sa malamig doon at ayaw niyang pawisan, kundi dahil it helps build the stamina and the endurance. And very beneficial yon kasi kahit na ilang rounds, hindi pa rin siya napapatumba nung opponent niya kasi mataas na yung kanyang endurance. Okay? So again, the idea is we are affected by the non-living organisms in our ecosystem. We depend on them, we are influenced by them, and we need them in order to survive. Okay?
So we both need, diba, Chair? Both needs.
Yes.
Kailangan tayong lahat.
Yes.
Biotic.
I think you watched Nemo, the movie Nemo, and if you will remember, Kuya Leonard, open your camera. If you will remember, meron doong fish na meron siyang light in front. Diba? Meron ganong fish doon. Wait lang. Search ko na lang.
Apa, Chair. Nakakatakot yung Chair. Malalaki yun eh.
The reason why that kind of fish has its own light in front. So they call it the anglerfish. Wait lang share ko na lang sa inyo. Especially for those. I know you're familiar with this. Ito siya.
Teacher, but they don't have eyes. Why do they need it?
Yan. So they have their own source of light in front. And the reason why they have this is because these kinds of fish are only found in the very deep parts of the ocean. Sobrang lalim na niya. And sunlight no longer reaches those part of the ocean. So hindi na naaabot ng sunlight itong areas na to. So these parts of the ocean is very cold and it's very dark. So in adaptation to that, this anglerfish, kung napapansin niyo, it has its own source of light in front. They use it to attract food. So other fishes are attracted to the light Tapos pag malapit na yung fish na na-attract, papatayin niya yung light sa kanya kakainin yung fish na yon.
Teacher, they have no eyes, di ba, Chair?
Yes, their eyes is like night vision kind of eyes. They are well adapted to the dark environment. So they don't really need this light to see. They only use the light to attract organisms.
Bait.
Yes.